not going to sell till it's like 10 years old. It actually starts looking more like a tree rather than just the bush, spiny bush. But they can get really pretty. Um, if you well around here, the height of these probably not more than 6 or 8 foot. Central California coast, some of those trees are really old. They're maybe 10 foot. You can walk underneath them. They have enough room to walk underneath them. But it's a beautiful little forest. It's a little miniature forest um, near Monterey area.
I have what I call a scrub oak, and it only grows on the north side of the hill.
Yeah.
I've documented from surveys and stuff that goes back over 100 years that that tree is still there.
Uh-huh.
There's well over 100 years.
Wow. Is yours a spiny leaf or a smooth leaf? Okay. Nice. You get acorns on it?
No.
No?
No acorn.
Yeah, we found a few acorns on the native trees, but none of them were any good. They were all eaten up. So, yeah, I'd love to grow more of these, especially if we can get the non-spiny ones. That'd make a better bush also. So the acorns, the seeds.
So mine doesn't have acorn, but I would do proper crop with that.
Well, you can probably air layer it, but that would be not. That's not the easiest thing to do. Air layering is when you um, is the way you can propagate any plant. You can peel off some of the bark around the stem and put green moss around it, cover with plastic, and then foil to keep it cool, keep it moist in there, and eventually the roots will grow into the green moss. Um, yeah. So that's one way you can propagate just about any plant, but it's time consuming and it makes the new plant cost well over $100 because of the effort it takes to do it. So here's another native plant, Orange County. This we didn't grow this one, but they're pretty tolerant, so we'll buy them in from other growers. This is Sambucus mexicana, which is the native elderberry. What we've learned is that the Sambucus native to the U.S., to North America, and to Europe are all the same species, they claim. We'll still call it Mexicana, but the proper name may be something else now. Sometimes this company puts on the proper names of things. Let me see if they... Yeah, so they now say it might actually be Sambucus nigra, which is the one from Europe, subspecies Cerulean, which is this would be the same as Mexicana. So these are bushes that usually live in the river washes. So if you go to any river wash that's not covered in concrete, this time of year you'll see these, coming up. Sometimes they disappear in the winter, but they grow fast to about 8 foot, 12 foot, even 15 foot. I think even 20 foot they can make it to. And then they have clusters of real tiny flowers that become kind of purple-black berries. Now, quite a few people grow these for the berries, but we do have to warn them. The berries, the flesh of the berry is certainly good to eat, but you're not supposed to eat the seeds. So they usually make them into things like wine, juice, jelly. But if you eat too many of the berries by hand at one time, you can get sick on them because, like with many fruiting plants, the seeds, nature doesn't want you to eat the seeds. They just want you to eat the berry part. So they make the seeds poisonous. But that's true with a lot of plants. I mean, if you eat They claim if you eat 150 apple seeds at one time, it can kill you. So plums, peach pits, they all have cyanide in them. So be aware of that. I think that's most of the ones native to Orange County. I, they're probably in the mounds just at the border. So you can, yeah, Manzanita's probably. But a lot of this other stuff, and I don't know if there's a stand. So this is native to Santa Barbara, I believe parts of LA County too. This is the Prunus ilicifolia, which is the also sometimes known as Catalina cherry. So you go to Catalina, and these are all over the, especially near, well, yeah. Remember, there's one place there was called Cherry Cove or something, where they have a lot of these, and these are actually distant cousins to real cherries. So Prunus illicifolius, which means holly-like leaves. They do have little teeth on the edges of their leaves. But what's unusual about them, you can see this one green cherry hanging there. The cherries, when they're ripe, are as big as European cherries. Flavor is somewhat like a wild cherry. The problem with them is that the pit is almost as big as the skin. So there's not much flesh on them. Make it interesting for a wild animal, a small wild animal to eat it. For humans, I've eaten quite a few of them, and they're quite good. But it's all seed. So, we need a little hybridizing work on this. Someone to select ones that have more flesh on them, because the berries, they make a lot of cherries. They look really good to eat. There's just not much on them to eat. So, and they are native to the islands and along the coastline of California. And then the Manzanitas. So the books mention Manzanitas being real delicate to grow. We're finding them not to be so delicate. So Manzanitas, they get that, they're ground cover types, which we've carried, but no one seems to want to buy them. So we've kind of given up selling those. People generally like the ones that look like little trees. So as this is Howard McMinn Manzanita. Manzanita is Arctostaphylos. And this is Howard McMinn. And it is one of the nicer ones. It's got the pinkish flowers, the reddish stems, the red bark. If you have patience, you can make it into a little tree. They're growing about a foot a year, maybe a foot and a half. And then another one that we picked up is quite a bit more tree-like. This one's called St. Helena. The Howard McMinn may struggle to make it to 10 foot. This one can probably go 15, 12 to 15 foot. And it's growing faster. It's definitely growing about 2 foot a year. But they both get the beautiful peeling red bark, which is Manzanitas are known for. This is a native Heuchera from the islands also. This one's called Canyon Bell. Whoop, Canyon. So the leaves get about twice as big as they are now, maybe like that. Makes a little perennial about so big, so wide, and then it sends up in the spring stalks of deep rose flowers. It's quite good. So here it's listed as a ground cover perennial. And light shade. So underneath trees, good place to put it. We didn't grow these.
Is the reason that we find most of this stuff out in the Channel Islands because it's just less human traffic and less animals grazing?
Well, it's true. The less animals have been there for a long time. People have been on the Channel Islands quite a long time.
Well, I know, but then
But yeah, they probably messed them up less. So, well, let's get into some of the more unusual things here. So one of the things that about 20, even might have been 30 years ago, we used to sell living Christmas trees, and one of our favorites was the giant sequoia. This is the giant sequoia here. It's still got its juvenile foliage. Usually the ones we sold as living Christmas trees had developed their more mature foliage, which is not as, this one looks kind of spiny. It doesn't feel spiny. It's not very sharp. But as they get older, the leaves get a little more rounded looking, or the foliage gets a little more rounded looking, not quite as spiny as this, and a little bit, I don't know if it was gray-green looking. I can't remember. This is like 20, 30 years ago. We sold them as living Christmas trees. But unfortunately, when we were selling them at that time, we kept a few to see how they would do in this area, and they all died every summer. We thought, must be the heat. Of course, I don't know how hot it gets up in the Sierras, but we couldn't ever get one to survive the summer. But that was before we knew a lot about soil. So last year we got some in. Last summer was about this big. And we're going, okay, we want to find out two things. Can it survive the heat? And does it need winter? And apparently it doesn't need either, because this thing was in a black plastic container all last summer in a real hot spot at our growing grounds, and last summer was much warmer than this summer, and showed no trouble. And after this winter, which was cool but no frost this winter, this thing just took off. I mean, this thing has put on about 20 inches of growth this spring, and looks like it's going to continue to grow. So the literature, I was looking up a nursery that specializes in these things, and they said, yeah, when these things are on their third year of life, they can grow 4 foot a year at that point, the fastest growing conifer. They'll put on about an inch of wood on all sides every year, so in 10 years they can be 20 inches wide. The trunk, 20-inch trunk by its 10th year. And if you give them what they like, which is this ample moisture, I would imagine up in the Sierras right now where these things are, they still have probably a foot of snow up there. They got a lot of snow this year. So for over half the year, they've got plenty of moisture. We know there's a one that's over 100 foot tall at the state capitol in Sacramento. So the heat apparently doesn't bother them. We've seen pictures of them on the East Coast, so apparently humidity doesn't bother them. So they're quite adaptable. So we don't know why why are they just in the Sierras? Maybe it's because that's where they get the water they need in California. But looks like you can grow them here too. So this will be a fun thing. We'll probably keep this around for at least 6 more months to see if it makes some mature leaves. We've got some smaller ones, slightly smaller ones out there in 5-gallon buckets that we're selling. Now the coast redwoods do fine here too, and they need a lot of water. Coast redwoods, if you back off of the water just a little bit, they get all brown tip maples. Of course, we haven't grown any of those ourselves, So that might be a problem with the soil that the growers use with them too. But conifers in general aren't as sensitive to bad soil as some other plants are. The roots don't seem to be quite as sensitive to compost in the ground. But this is totally in our soil. It looks good.
Larry, can I interrupt you a second? I'm retiring and I'm leaving the state. Thank you.
Okay. Good to see you. Yes.
I don't know what brand it was, and I'm kind of thinking, years ago, we used to buy for Christmas a potted Christmas tree, live Christmas tree, and we put it on our son's birthday. I took those home, took them out of the pot, stuck them in the ground, no water, no nothing, and this year, 2-3 months ago, I had my gardeners have to cut them down, and there was well over 10 foot tall, and deep, and the trunk was 6-7 inches in diameter, and the reason I had to cut them down was there's such a fire hazard. It would have taken my house and the neighbor's house up, so I just decided we gotta get rid of it. Broke my heart to take them down, but
Well, most living Christmas trees are usually pines. Did yours have a distinctive, strong pine smell, or did it not? Sure, sure. Like Monterey pine is one that's been used for a long time, but that one, you get anywhere near it, it smells like a pine. You know, it smells real.
the needles on a mature tree were about that long.
Doesn't sound like a Monterey pine, but well, it could be. But they use quite a few different pines as living Christmas trees. So a lup,
I'm guessing I bought them from Home Depot.
Lupo pine is probably more commonly used as living Christmas trees. So, okay.
My husband was saying that they were taking those, a lot of people were taking those and planting them out on the street, and they just
The giant sequoias.
no, like the
Living Christmas
yeah,
every
they
year.
did.
I didn't have a watering system for them. We never watered them. Didn't do anything.
Well, that's sounding more and more like a Lupo pine, which is from the deserts of Africa. So, yeah, there's certain pines that do real well without hardly any moisture. So, okay, so some of the other plants, well, here's another interesting conifer that can be used as a living Christmas tree too. This is the incense cedar, which is native from Baja to Oregon, usually up in the mountains where it's moister, but they'll live anywhere in California. Slow growing when they're young. This is, let me write down the name, Calocedrus decurrens. Got a lot of different names: California cedar, incense cedar. What's interesting about this plant is it's really flexible. Even when it's got a thick trunk, it's really flexible. So a long time ago, people noticed that the wood is very flexible. It's not brittle. So this is the tree. They said 90% of all pencils are made out of this wood because it doesn't shatter when you try to sharpen it. So that's its claim to fame. But yeah, you go up to Lake Arrowhead, Big Bear, it's all over the place. It doesn't look like it fits in. It gets real full. I mean, it's really, the foliage gets real dense. And it totally looks out of place because it's almost too green. In the cities, figure they'll grow 20 to 40 foot, maybe 8 to 10 foot wide. So, in our lifetime, I mean, if you give them a couple hundred years, they can be over 100 foot tall. and maybe 15, 20 foot across. So they're more upright. Um,
So we had one of those, and I get rid of it. You want to call somebody that comes.
right. These are used a lot for making high screens. They say even the giant redwoods sometimes are used to make big screens. So. Now another conifer that is native to California, although the name doesn't sound right. This is blue. This is the Arizona cypress, which actually is found more in Mexico than any place else. But there are outposts of these in Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah. It's all over the desert Southwest. Now most of them aren't this blue. This blue selection of it was actually discovered in a nursery in New Zealand who was growing this there, but it's such a nice color, and it's a little smaller than the species. So this one tends to grow at a decent rate, about 2 foot a year, to about 20 to 40 foot, and about 8 to 12 wide. So compared to Italian cypress, half as tall, twice as wide. So it's also used for screening or individual specimens. Pretty nice. And quite drought tolerant. So most conifers are pretty good that way, I would say, except for the giant sequoia, which, well, giant sequoia, as they said, on dry years, they just don't grow. The literature says on giant sequoias that if you give them ideal conditions year-round, they might reach 200 foot in one person's lifetime. But in nature, they don't get ideal conditions every year. Now, one of the things we've learned over the years is that, when we had the drought, say it was 8 years ago when they called that drought, and they started telling people plant natives, and none of them were doing well at all. I mean, they're all rotting out primarily. But during a drought is not the right time to start anything, really. So they're doing a study once on the valley oaks in the Central Valley. Back in the 80s, they said none of the researchers here have ever seen a young valley oak. They all look like they're all 50, 80 years old. We think they're going extinct. So they started doing research on the valley oaks, and then the El Niños of 94 through 98 happened. And they said, well, the valley is now covered with baby valley oaks. Apparently you need 3 or 4 years in a row of moist conditions to get the native trees started. And that doesn't happen every year. It happens every 40, 50 years. We get that kind of weather pattern where it's just wet for 3 or 4 years in a row. So they discontinued their research at that time. That's how scientists are. They get all alarmed, and they find out, oh, there's nothing to be alarmed about. This is part of nature's cycle. So, and I think in a few more years we'll find that about global warming too. It's just a part of nature's cycle. So anyway, so one thing about natives is that they need quite a bit of water in the ground to get established and to get going. And once they're well established, say 2 or 3 years, then you can probably turn off the water totally. So, okay, another native that's not native to here, to Orange County, but is native in California is the western redbud. This is a real young one yet, so it's still looks like a bush. But these usually they're multi-trunk, sometimes they're single trunk, and they're kind of a vase-shaped tree. Nice leaves. Those heart-shaped leaves are kind of nice. Cercis. Redbuds are native all around the world. There are redbuds in China, redbuds in Europe, redbirds on the East Coast, and this is our West Coast one, Cercis occidentalis. They're deciduous trees. The leaves turn yellow in December, drop off. These tend to grow about between 10 and 15. They can get bigger than that, but that's the common size you'll see in people's yards, about 10 foot by 10 foot to maybe 15 by 15. Around April, they wake up. They bloom pink flowers, common colors, pink. They'll bloom for about a month, and then the leaves come on, and they have this kind of a blue-green look to them. And generally, as you grow this plant, you would trim off all the little branches in the interior to expose the trunk system after a while, and eventually you can walk underneath. It might take a few more years before you can walk underneath the tree, the canopy of this tree. So it is one of the nicer native trees, but not native to Orange County, but certainly a good native. Here's another tree we like a lot. So this is desert willow. This is Schalopsis. This is a variety selection called Bubba. And this is our favorite versions of Schalopsis that we've seen. It is deciduous. It wakes up in April, so it's kind of a late waker upper. So they're pretty bare in the wintertime. They get their leaves and they grow about 6 inches and then they start blooming. So they grow 6 inches, bloom, and those flowers are over. They branch out, grow about 6 more inches, bloom again. And then when those flowers are all done, they branch out, grow 6 more inches. They can bloom all through summer into about mid-fall. I would say early November is probably their last bloom. So they're nice that way in that they're one of the most consistent blooming trees that we can grow. Most plants, most trees only bloom for up to a month, whereas this one can bloom constantly all summer. Now we like the Bubba variety because it seems to be self-sterile. So most of the other desert willows, when the flowers are done, they make these seed pods that hang down about 20 inches. And it looks like shoestrings hanging all over the tree, and it gets a little messy and also stops their blooming. Unless this is next to a different desert willow, it doesn't seem to make any seed pods, at least when it's young. We haven't seen it. Some trees, as they get older, will make seed pods no matter what. But we've never seen one of these make seed pods at our store. It may in the long run. These are distant cousins to jacaranda and the other trumpet trees that we sell. But yeah, unique in that it blooms all summer long. Very attractive to hummingbirds. This selection, well, they're native to California, not the West Coast, but Central California, the eastern side of California, Arizona, Mexico, New Mexico into Texas. And this particular variety was selected in Texas. And it does have a little bit broader leaf than some of the desert willows native around here, which have a little thinner leaves. But that is one of our favorite trees too. This is a perennial. I didn't mention this already, did I? Eriogonum. This is red buckwheat. It's not real long lived. They do reseed. They grow about 1 foot high and wide. Live about 3 years, bloom in the late spring into summer. So real nice color for a native. Most of the other buckwheats have either cream colored flowers, yellow flowers. There's one that's got a nice bright yellow, but it's native up north more. This is more of a local native here. Um, Blue-eyed grass, which is a little iris, native to riverbeds, so it's not really drought tolerant. They go to sleep if it gets dry. They just turn brown, everything shrivels up, and then they come back when it rains again. Bloom spring into early summer. You can see all these spent flowers on here, so pretty nice show. A lot of people use these along a dry riverbed. We didn't grow these either. These are pretty tolerant to bad soil. I think I covered just about everything. I don't know did I mention the dudleyas. So dudleyas are native to the hills around here. I mean, if you go on Ortega Highway, of course, I haven't driven that road for about 10 years. I don't know if they're still there. But on the north sides of the slopes in Orange County, these dudleyas live. They don't seem to like the hot, dry south side, but the north sides, where it's not so intense, they'll live, and they come from the Channel Islands. There's quite a few different forms: wider leaves, thinner leaves, pointier, and they, unfortunately, the collectors have really decimated the wild population. So this is an interesting group. So Steve McCabe made it his life's work to make sure that these don't go extinct in nature from collectors who collect them and then sell them for high prices. So he's propagating them as fast as he can in as many forms as he can. He says he wants to flood the market so they're not that pricey, so they don't draw collectors from, they'll prevent collectors from picking them out of the wild. So he's growing a lot of dudleyas. That's his life's work, is to grow hordes of dudleyas so the price on them will come down. That's pretty much it. Any questions today?
Okay, after you buy up, like the Manzanita, do I need to, I guess use that soil?
Yeah, well, the manzanitas, we grew them in our soil, so generally when you plant these, just make certain, a lot of the natives make certain they're not in a low spot where water collects in the winter. That's about it. I mean, we find that you can use any watering scheme you want on these. You can water them every day if you like, because we water them along with everything else in our nursery. Just water them every day. None of these have ever rotted on us once we get them into the right soil. Nothing. I mean, we haven't found a single native plant yet. I mean, this is about half of what we've grown in the natives. We're just out of a lot of things right now. But nothing has had trouble with water once the soil is right, which should be, well, it should be just like any other plant. Water doesn't hurt them. Yes.
One time I tried getting some Manzanita berries and seeds, whatever they are. I tried getting them to sprout. I couldn't get it to do it. Now they came from like they're okay. But do they have to? You have to wait a year to go through that cycle, or?
Well, yeah, a lot of, like when we grow acorns, because we've grown a lot of the native oaks from acorns, put them in the fridge. You get them, you put them in moist soil, put in a little Ziploc bag, and throw them in the fridge for 3 months. Because a lot of our native plants are used to having the sprouting in the spring. And if they don't have a spring, or if they don't have a winter, they don't sprout.
There was another time that I was up at Arboretum in Arcadia, and I was kind of gathered around acorns and stuff like that. Found all kinds of different shapes and things. I could get the acorns to sprout, but I couldn't get a lot of the other
Hmm.
Big black ones. I don't know what they were. They're awful. They were super large. I think it's like this brown.
Well, some of the other, like I believe it's Feromnias. I think we bring one in. Huh, forgot to bring it in. Matilaha poppy. I believe those they have to be exposed to a fire. So what they do with certain California seeds is they'll put them on a piece of paper, which is a low temperature fire, just like in nature. When weeds burn, it's not that hot. So they say it's a low temperature fire, maybe 400, 500 degrees, and they'll just briefly scorch the seeds and then they sprout better. So you can try that too. Or if it's a berry, you might have to eat it. And yeah.
There are some plants that grow along rivers and stuff that are designed to get flow down the river, get beat against the rocks before they'll sprout.
Well, true. And yeah, and some California natives need a lot of water. I mean, we don't carry them anymore, but the white alders, they live in the river. And we lost a lot of white alders the last 10 years of drought. A lot of them died, so.
Is oleander pretty popular also?
Not a native.
It's not native.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.